Astrologers study the relationships and historical cycles between these cycles by observing the repetitive digressions of the planets around the Sun and the events on Earth. The purpose of learning about the cycles in history is to think that it can prevent us from falling into the same mistakes and traps again. Since scientific theories show us that similar ones of the period we are moving forward have repeated before in history, the primary goal now should be to time the repetitions and try to determine how differences will occur this time. I have always found a saying very valuable: he who does not know his past cannot know his future. So, astrology should definitely be on the scene at this point. From a historical perspective, all planetary cycles are important, but from the point of view of collective life, the three cycles in which Saturn, Uranus and Pluto are located are the most important and influential. The connections of these planets with each other, that is, their cycles, are harbingers of changes and developments related to the evolution of mankind in society and culture, collective life. Astrologer Bill Herbst sees the cycles of these three planets as an alarm clock. According to Herbst, the alarms of these three clocks sound very loudly and wake us up from our collective sleep, informing us of the time of change. When all these alarms sound at the same time, they inform that humanity and civilization will enter a turbulent period of change, and that change and evolutionary development at the extremes are inevitable. Planetary cycles signal that we are on the verge of an important evolutionary turn that our generation will experience. Alarm bells are ringing, signaling that important times of change are approaching. Astrology has played a major role in society since the very beginning of civilization, perhaps even earlier. Its effects can be seen all over the world. Horoscope astrology, which aims to predict worldly events and analyze individual fate, appeared in Mesopotamia long before Christ. Initially, it consisted only in a simple examination of the heavens for prophecies that could affect the kingdom. These prophetic observations often involved weather phenomena intertwined with accurate astronomical phenomena. The Mesopotamians, especially the Babylonians, observed the phenomena and compiled lists. As a result, they have reached a point where, based on the observed iterations of the planets, they will accurately predict the positions of the planets at any time in the future, within the limits of logic. These statistical compilations constitute the basic logic of world astrology today as well. Astrology is one of the important statistical methods applied to understand the future by looking at the past. The purpose of applying astrology is not to produce catastrophic scenarios, but to warn against possible adversities. Historical cycles. They say history repeats itself. At school, we all learned that similar events repeat in cycles at certain December intervals thanks to chronological calendars. Of course, what we learned was not just for the development of our general culture. Learning the broad patterns of history can keep us conscious when we encounter situations from the past again. It may even prevent us from falling into the same traps again. Although I believe very much in fate, I think that the reactions and approaches we give with I will also have an important meaning. Since history consists of cycles, then we can mark the events that happened in circles, rather than writing them down in straight lines. In fact, this is exactly what astrologers do. Real astrologers decipher these cycles by observing the relationship between events on Earth and the repetitive turns of the planets around the Sun. Astrologers have been consulted throughout the ages to get their cosmic perspective in various crisis periods. For those who are unfamiliar with the subject, it would be appropriate to explain how astrology works by looking at a few basic principles. A tour of our planet takes about 365 days, so if we were to put the Earth at the center of our solar system, it would seem that the Sun takes 365 days to rotate around our Earth. Similarly, other planets also have their own cycles. When viewed from Earth, the planets appear to be moving forward, as well as sometimes stretching. The exoplanets complete a tour between about 2 years, Mars, and 248 years, Pluto. December. It is important to know in which sign these planets are, in which degree of this sign they are. Especially since Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, which are planets with long cycles, stay in the signs they are in for a long time. If we know the events that occurred when they were in the sign earlier in history, we can predict that similar effects will occur when they are in this sign in the period close to our time. We can even take into account the degrees. For example, in 2009, Pluto will be in the first 3 degrees of Capricorn. What happened in the world about 248 years ago, when Capricorn moved in the same degrees, will serve as an important example for us. For more recent periods, we can work on the horoscope and degrees in which Saturn is located, because the cycles of Saturn are about 30 years. Of course, in order to make ideal predictions, knowing the position of a planet alone will not be enough to see the whole picture. When it comes to predicting events of global importance, looking at the interaction of 2 or more planets together will bring more accurate predictions. For a start, we can consider binary loops. The cycle of the 2 planets together works like the hand of the clock with a scorpion. Let's imagine 2 planets at the same degree of the zodiac, decoupled together. So they should be at exactly 12 o'clock. As we mentioned above, the rotation speeds of the planets around the Sun differ from each other. Since one planet will move faster than the other, these 2 planets will begin to separate from each other from the exact position of 12 o'clock. During a planetary cycle observed from Earth, that planet moves in and out of certain sequences or geometric relationships with each of the other planets. These relationships are called angles. For example, when it is 12:15, these 2 planets will be at an angle of 90 degrees to each other. At 12:30, these 2 planets will be at an angle of 180 degrees to each other. In the meantime, while the decoy is moving forward, the scorpion will also start to slowly shift from its position at 12:00 to the position of 1300 hours. When the time is a little past 12:45, these 2 planets will be at an angle of about 90 degrees to each other, because Scorpio is closer to the 13:00 position. Then, when the time is 13:05, these 2 planets will align again, just as these 2 scorpions and the minute hand have overlapped. If we define the starting point of the previous overlap, for example, in Capricorn, this time they will overlap in the next sign, namely Aquarius. Astrologically, they will make a conjunction. Now let's think of the Scorpio one as the Sun and the minute hand one as the Moon. One cycle after these 2 make a conjunction in one sign of the zodiac, they make a conjunction in the next sign of the zodiac. We call it the new moon. We can also compare the cycles between the other planets to the cycles of this binary deceleration. The fact that the planets form angles indicates planetary archetypes that coincide with a certain joint activation and interaction. In other words, when 2 planets enter into a certain geometric relationship, it is observed that the 2 archetypes that coincide with them are reflected in human relationships in the form of increasing dynamic interactions and expressions. The angles that are considered the most effective in world astrology and are considered important because they reveal effects on an event-by-event basis are 90 degrees, square, 180 degrees, opposite, and the conjunction of these 2 planets, 0 degrees. Sometime after the cycle of these 2 planets begins, the fast-moving planet will catch up with the other, and the same cycle will be repeated. The longest cycle between the 2 planets is experienced between Neptune and Pluto, and it takes 492 years for a cycle to be completed. December. Astrologers observe these repetitive turns of the planets around the Sun and compare them with events, developments on Earth. From the point of view of collective life, the binary cycles of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are the most important and influential. The cycles of these planets are harbingers of changes and developments related to the evolution of human beings in society and culture, collective life. Generation planets, which is beyond the visible planets, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, they are making the transition from the bushings after a long time, and this is the generation of concepts and values that express the general characteristics of the towers symbolize them in a face to generation planets were called Uranus 18. in the 19th century, Neptune in the 18th century, and Pluto in the 20th. It was discovered in the 18th century. The discoveries of these planets coincide with the rapid development in the consciousness of mankind and the radical emergence of new qualities. We can observe the archetypal qualities attributed to these planets in the basic historical events, collective dynamics and cultural currents that took place during the periods when they were discovered. The discovery of a planet coincides with the emergence of trends belonging to that planet at the same time. In the 1780s, when Uranus was discovered, we see that freedoms came to the fore and colonies were ended. The French Revolution also coincides with the discovery of Uranus. As a result of this revolution, uprisings against the feudal regime took place all over the world. That is why Uranus is known for its libertarianism, rebelliousness and its ability to rebel against authority. This was also the time when people were in search of new things.